Hello and welcome, friends. Up till now, we have discussed the various approaches which have been suggested in India to fix the poverty line. We also discussed the poverty line as per the World Bank. We also discussed how there has been a change in people below poverty line in India over the period of years. Now, let us have a brief look at how poverty is measured, and then what are the basic causes that so many people still in India are still below poverty line, and what could be the various solutions. So should we start? We are starting with measurement of poverty. For measurement of poverty, apart from the various surveys which are conducted by some private agencies or research firms, or maybe at times media houses, the public sector entity which has been interested in this particular job is the National Sample Survey Organization, or the NSSO, which is basically part of the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. So it's the NSSO which conducts these kind of surveys, and these surveys are called the consumption surveys because they find out the amount spent on consumption. So that is why they are called consumption surveys. Basically, in consumption surveys, we basically find out how much a particular individual or a respondent has consumed. What is the worth of goods that he has consumed? So that is why they are called consumption surveys. This is the methodology which is adopted by the NSSO, and these consumption surveys are conducted. The frequency is quinquennial. Now, quinquennial means every 5 years. So they are conducted every 5 years. And this is how we get an understanding of the poverty levels and the absolute number or the percentage number of the below poverty population in India. Now, let us have a brief look at the various causes of poverty in India. Number one, and a very, very major cause, is over dependence on agriculture. We have seen that almost more than a majority of our population, almost 55 to 60% of population, is still dependent on agriculture. And this is a big issue. Why? Because agriculture in India is not remunerative. There are reasons behind that. First thing is meager investment in agriculture. There is not much investment in agriculture. The government has also not invested much in creating infrastructure so that the agriculture can be carried out efficiently. For example, if you talk about the irrigation network, we only have canal network in a few places only. Likewise, we do not have check dams in villages where there is a scarcity of water in most months of the year. So there we could have constructed a check dam so that the water can be preserved during the rainy seasons for purpose of use during the dry spell. So these kind of infrastructure and this kind of investment is not there in agriculture, and this is one major problem. And one reason why this kind of investment has not been made in agriculture is the practice of tenants tilling the field. Tenants are those people who till the fields of the landlords. While the landlords own the field, the tenants basically plow the fields, because naturally the landlords own a very large area, so the fields are they are tilled by the tenants. In return, they pay the landlords in cash or in kind. So naturally the tenants, since they are not owning the land, they do not have any incentive for investing in improving the soil quality, in improving the soil quality and other such stuff. And that is why the investment is much less, and because of which the agriculture is still not remunerative. The returns are not very high. Again, we know that the productivity is very, very low in India. If you compare the productivity of some food crops here in India with the productivity in China or maybe in America, you would find that our productivity is far below their productive level. So we are not able to grow that much. We are not able to grow that much crop as they are able to do, and this is because of, again, lack of investment in agriculture. Then another issue is difficult to access institutional credit. Again, the investment is less because the farming community does not have easy access to institutional credit, because if you want to invest in improving the land quality, or in improving the soil quality, or maybe in testing your soil to find out its nutrient profile and accordingly use fertilizers, then you require credit, because you need to invest some money for which you would require some credit, some financing, and these kind of sources of finance are not easily accessible to our farming community. Again, since the farmers are not able to market their products well, their crops well in the market, they are not able to generate good revenue for their hard work, they are not able to bargain for a higher price, and because of which they are still not able to earn much. And then as far as the auxiliary industries are concerned, industries which are dependent on agriculture to provide them raw material, for example food processing industries, producing pickles or jams from fruits, or maybe processing wheat into biscuits or some other kind of snacks. So these kind of auxiliary industries, they are still not developed in the rural hinterland, because of which the farmer has no other means, he has no other option but to sell his produce to the intermediaries at a very low price, and because of which he is not able to earn much, and because of which the most of our farming community remains poor. If you look at our farming community, the people who actually earn their livelihood through farming activities or through cultivation, you would find that most of them are still living a life of penury. There are a few exceptions, the big landlords. Apart from that, most of these people who are engaged in primary activities, they are living a life of penury. So the reasons have been mentioned here. The agriculture, the cultivation, it is not remunerative, and the reasons have been mentioned here. Then this is just one cause for poverty in India, for widespread poverty in India. Then another issue is lack of education. Because lack of education, we still are not able to provide sufficient access to specifically people in rural areas and to urban poor also, to our education infrastructure, to schools and colleges. And the lack of education ultimately reduces their chances of earning a higher income when they enter the productive age group of 18 to 60 years. So this is one more reason why poverty is very much widespread in India. People are not having access to quality education, or the quality education is not affordable for them. They cannot gain skills, and since they cannot gain skills, they would naturally not be able to earn much when they enter their productive age group, and they would be doomed to a life of poverty, doomed to a life of penury. Then limited access to credit is the cause here also. Why this has been stated again, when we are talking here, we were basically talking about credit for purpose of cultivation, but here we are talking of credit for other purposes apart from cultivation. It could be for starting a small business, it could be for starting maybe some kind of a manufacturing, small scale manufacturing industry, maybe setting up one's own business. So if these kind of credit facilities are not available, there are people who would not be able to invest in these kind of activities and diversify and augment their income. So they would not be able to augment their income, and they would remain poor throughout their life. And that is why government has very recently, specifically after the COVID outbreak, they've come up with so many initiatives to improve the access of credit for specifically the rural people as well as the urban poor. For example, the mobile traders and the street hawkers, the ready wala which operates in urban areas. Now the government is saying that they would be provided a loan of up to rupees 50,000, and this loan would be provided without the need for them to furnish any security. So these kind of initiatives are being taken by the government specifically to improve the access to credit for these people who are poor, be it in the rural areas, be it our urban poor. Again, since the poor households, they simply do not have access to good food, good medical facilities, and good education facilities, they are doomed to remain poor. So they start as poor and they continue being poor throughout their life, just because they cannot invest anything. They cannot invest in property, simply they do not have access to credit. They cannot invest in education because they are finding difficult to even meet their food requirements. So simply they cannot invest, and if they cannot invest in education or maybe better nourishment, better nutrition for their children, then their children would again grow up to remain employed in low paying jobs. So this is something that leads to further perpetuation of poverty, and those who are poor, they continue to remain poor. Then war and violence, this is one major reason for poverty. In many places in the world, you might have seen in in Syria, a civil war has been going on for 4 to 5 years. It has been estimated that crores of people have, simply because of the war, they were not able to run their businesses, and they've started finding it even difficult to have 2 square meals a day just because of the war. So since the war and violence and situations like this, they make it really difficult for the residents of a particular place to run their own business, to earn their own livelihood. So these wars and violence actually lead to poverty. You can have a look at the situation in Afghanistan. Afghanistan has been ravaged by civil war and internal conflict since almost 1980, and that is why it is among the poorest countries in the world. So war and violence are major reasons of poverty, though it may not be true for India, because fortunately we have not witnessed wars and violence at such a big level. However, this is true for other poor countries and other poor communities across the world. And then discrimination owing to belonging to ethnic minorities, scheduled caste and tribes, women and physically disabled segments. So belonging to these segments would mean that you are discriminated against if you are part of an ethnic minority. If you are part of if you are basically from a scheduled caste or scheduled tribe, then there is a lot of discrimination, and the people from these segments, they are simply not allowed the opportunity. Because of this discrimination, they are not allowed the opportunity to improve their skills, to get higher education, to set up their own business, and this way that is why they are not able to further augment their income, to diversify their income, and they hence remain poor. So these are some of the causes for poverty, and one major cause now which has basically started to gain prominence in the last few decades is climate change. So many people have been driven out of their traditional ancestral land just because of the climate change. If you talk about agriculture also, because of the climate change, the rainfalls are less predictable, and there are more instances of extreme rainfalls, extreme weather events, which means the rainfall, if there's a rainfall, it would be very intense, which would ultimately damage the crop. Or there might be rainfalls when actually they are not expected to be there. So there is a rainfall when maybe in the month of May, when the crop is just sown and it does not require any irrigation at that point of time. So there might be rainfall, and this will ultimately damage the crop, which might ultimately lead to a decrease in earning for the farmer community. Likewise, for example, climate change has been responsible for displacement of so many people who have set up their businesses in a particular place, who had found their own residences in a particular place. They were displaced because of the climate change, and it became difficult for them to survive, and it became difficult for them to maintain the same standard of living, and ultimately it basically led to them becoming poor. So these are the causes for poverty in our country. Now let us talk about some of the efforts made by the government to eradicate poverty. Initially, just after independence, we started with the Food for Works program, wherein the people were basically made to work, and in lieu they were provided food. So these were the poverty alleviation programs at that point of time. So how do we alleviate poverty? What was the basic objective? The objective was that the beneficiary would work, and then in lieu of that he would be given food. So this way he would be at least able to earn something. He will be at least able to feed himself and his family. So that was the main objective behind this food for work program. And then it then evolved. There was further evolution in the thinking and in the approach of the government, which resulted into the National Rural Employment Program. Herein employment was provided in the rural areas, and then wages were paid to the beneficiaries. And this was slightly different from the food for work program, but then in essence you find that again the wages are being paid instead of the food, and that is a difference. In food for work program, the food was paid in lieu of the physical labor which was provided by the beneficiary. Here in National Rural Employment Program, they are being provided wages, so the beneficiary can use that wages. The wages that he is earning can be utilized not only for purpose of purchasing food, but also on medical facilities or maybe on education also. So that was another change in approach by the government. Then this program was conceived, Integrated Rural Development Program, IRDP, wherein credit was provided to people apart from training. So poor people were basically provided credit so that they could start their own businesses. They could set up their own business enterprise, and they could be self-employed, because government understood that it's just not possible for it to provide gainful job opportunities to all the people. So the government started focusing on self-employment and ensured that the people who are interested to set up their own enterprises, to set up their own businesses, they could have access to credit. Then this new program which came up was TRISEM, which basically is training of rural youth for self-employment. Now the difference was that here the focus was also on training the rural youth. It was found out that basically people, if they are given credit, they would not be able to they might set up their own enterprises using that credit, they might set up their own business, but ultimately the survival of business requires some skills, and if the beneficiary does not have those skills, he would not be able to continue his business, he would not be able to sustain his business. And that was why TRISEM was conceived, training of rural youth for self-employment. And as the name suggests, in this scheme the rural youth was provided training so that they can set up their own enterprise. So the focus was also on training, on imparting skills. Once the skills are imparted, the youth can set up his own enterprise. Apart from that, since to set up an enterprise one requires credit also, so the arrangement was made in coordination with the banks that the beneficiaries would not only be provided training but would also be provided some kind of a credit facility so that they can set up their enterprise and they can sustain that enterprise. So this was TRISEM. And the most recent initiative which was taken by the UPA government in 2005 under the Prime Ministership of Dr. Manmohan Singh is the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. Here, as you might all be knowing that families in rural areas, they are provided 100 days of guaranteed work in a particular year, and the wages are paid as per the minimum wage in that particular state. So for example, if minimum wage in a particular state is, let's say, rupees 210, a particular family would be provided 100 days of work, and at the rate of 200 rupees per day, the family would be able to earn 20,000 rupees in a year. So this is Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, which guarantees 100 days of wage employment to beneficiary families. Now please understand that this guarantee is not given to individuals but to families, which means 100 days of wage employment would mean that a family would be given 100 days of wage employment, which means if there are two brothers in a particular family and they want to get wage employment, the whole family would be provided a maximum of 100 days, which means if the both brothers they want to work, they can be provided 50 days each. Or it could be that one brother is working for 80 days, the other one is working for 20 days. So the threshold is for the whole family. So 100 days of wage employment for families in rural areas, and as I said, the wages would be as per the minimum wages prevalent in the particular state. So this was done so that the people in the rural areas, specifically in the rural communities, who do not have access to gainful employment opportunity throughout the year. Please understand, agriculture in most of the part of our country, people grow crops just once or twice, which means they would not be having employment throughout the year. So once the crop has been harvested, they would not be having any job. So the objective of this particular scheme was to provide them gainful opportunity during those off seasons. So this was the main objective, but then it was thought that since they are made to work, can their work be also used for some developmental activities? And then this particular thinking emerged that probably their work can be used for the development of the areas of the particular rural area. And how? So these people who are made to work, who are given wage employment for 100 days in a particular year, they are made to work in development activities. For example, they are made to work on construction sites where maybe a check dam is being constructed so that the rainwater can be stored. The rainwater can be stored for use during the off season. Likewise, they can be made to work in building a wall to check soil erosion or to check landslide. So these kind of work, which are also resulting into creation of permanent assets, they are encouraged under MGNREGS. In this sense, this particular scheme is improved version of the earlier programs, because now the focus is not only on providing jobs to the rural youth, but also on creating productive assets in the rural areas. And I've given you examples, maybe check dams, or maybe the irrigation canals or irrigation network, or maybe the wall to prevent the soil erosion or the landslide. So these kind of assets are also constructed by making use of the labor of the beneficiaries under this scheme. And that is why this particular scheme is different from the schemes which were implemented earlier. So friends, thank you very much. With this we conclude our discussion on poverty. In the next session we'll have a very brief look at inequity, because inequity is very much connected to poverty, and then we'll move on to the second major topic in this particular unit, which is the unemployment. Thank you.